All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for hanging out for a minute while we were getting some stuff situated. I am Brian Hoagley, managing partner at SideChannel and the host of #CISO Life. Today, I'm joined by two esteemed guests, Joe Klein and Chris Foulon. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining. We're really looking forward to the conversation. As you can see, I'm not in my dark room at the studio at home. I am at Secure World Boston, downtown Boston, the Heinz Convention Center. If you are in the Boston area or for some reason watching this while downstairs in Convention Center, hit me up. I'll be back down there later this afternoon. We'll be here for 2 days. Catch me walking around. I've got books. I've got some discussion points. There's some great vendors, and quite honestly, it's just really nice to be out and seeing people. So Chris and Joe, welcome. We're going to talk about everything around passwords, MFA, SSO, IAM. Sounds like this is an identity discussion. Again, going back to basics, what are the things that we're going to be, really important around the identity space? So let's introduce ourselves. Chris, if you want to introduce yourself to our group of attendees.
Hey everyone, my name is Christophe Foulon. I am the host of a podcast called Breaking into Cybersecurity, as well as a senior manager doing cybersecurity consulting for an F10 fintech.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Welcome. Great to have you on. And everyone, we'll put the information down below for contact for everybody here, especially checking out Chris's show. It's phenomenal. I've had the pleasure of being on it. I listened to it. It's a great piece. If you're looking at getting into basics, then maybe you're looking at getting into security. Chris has a phenomenal show and talk track, on this. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Joe Klein. I'm out of the Philadelphia area. I've been a Chief Information Security Officer for 5 years prior to joining SideChannel. Now I'm a partner helping run our cybersecurity practice with Brian.
Yeah, very excited to have Joe on here. I have the pleasure of working with him. He's a partner in the firm, but as I kind of laid out, this topic, Joe was the very first one in our organization to raise his hand and say, hey, let me get in on that. So, all right. So without further ado, I think we're just going to kind of build up, right? As we think about identity and usernames, password, MFA, just authenticating, right, and authorization to access systems. What's maybe this first step that we just need to maybe just think about? Okay, username, password is dead. We have to kind of get beyond that. Are you still seeing this happening inside of organizations where, hey, what do I need anything more than a username and password? Joe, what are you seeing inside of the clients that you're working with, you have visibility to, that type of mentality, and how are you combating that?
So the first thing that I wanted to highlight is when we're talking about all of these solutions, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for MFA, single sign-on, identity access management, password managers. Every organization is a little bit different, and figuring out the right balance is important. But when I go into organizations, I would say at least 75% of the time, it's really eye-opening to see that there are common trends. Very, very common to see people throughout the organization, from executive leadership down to IT admins, that are still using those same 1, 2, 3 passwords across all of their logins. I've seen people with their passwords written on their computer screen and the Post-it notes and under the keyboard. And then multi-factor as well. This is one of the very first things that is so important to strengthen the attack surface and to put in front of any external facing login. Just something simple like turning on multi-factor authentication in front of Office 365, G Suite, your VPN is so critical to hardening your attack surface.
Chris, go ahead, please.
I was just going to add on to that. That's how I started my cybersecurity career. Is someone had a Post-it note with their password just left out on their keyboard, and I said, "There's got to be a better way." Back then, there wasn't multi-factor authentication, so we had to find compensating controls in other ways. But Joe, as you mentioned, including easy to use, frictionless ways to add that second layer of authentication, using multi-factor authentication, whether it's an application, it's a longer passphrase that is kept by two people for very secure things, or a hard token, or if you have to, an SMS. That could be a good fallback mechanism. But yeah, those are good ways to provide additional layers of friction for the threat actors, while in not trying to make it too friction oriented for your users. Because if there's too much friction imposed, you're going to find ways around it, or you're just going to revolt.
Right. So we talk about, you guys mentioned passwords being written down, passwords being lengthy. I mean, humans aren't meant to memorize what would be considered complex enough to keep us secure, right? Like it's just, I've seen it since long time ago. I mean, decades now, same type of behavior. We should just assume that human behavior is going to be one where this is too hard to remember, I'm going to write it down, or I'm going to, have my password be the name of my dog, because that's, again, something I can remember. So we're not going to get away from making passwords easier for you to remember. So we've seen the emergence of these password manager capabilities, and there's third-party ones, there's browser-based ones. Let's talk through that. Joe, what are your thoughts on kind of built-in password managers into browsers versus these third-party added password managers? And is that doing enough to remove the friction for users to do and use secure passwords, as well as raise the bar for attackers?
So, number of questions there, Brian. I think the first is I prefer third-party password managers. The browser password managers I found are not very secure. Companies like Apple are starting to build password managers into their operating system. I like that third-party governance. I love that separate organization that is squarely focused on laser focused on building out a secure password enclave. In many organizations, I see this being deployed for executives, for IT administrators. In some organizations, I see it deployed for everybody. As for does it reduce the friction? It really depends. In order to really embrace a password manager, you have to understand how it works, and you have to spend some time, like any good technology, educating your user base on it. How does it work? How do you populate the entries properly? And by the way, this isn't just a mechanism for you to easily store the same password and just auto submit passwords. You have to actually change your password to, either those passphrases or those long randomized passwords. So when people truly understand how it works, when people embrace the technology and commit to it, I find it to be very effective.
Excellent. Chris, and I got a question here from Sadia. We'll get to in a second. But Chris, what are your thoughts around third-party versus browser-based ones, and what have you seen rolled out that has made you kind of think, hey, the adoptability of this, it's worth doing?
Well, I personally recommend using that third party like Joe does. I have a third party one that I use. It has a family service for my personal one. I could share it with my wife. It has plugins for the browsers. It has install options. It has mobile options. So it allows users to easily integrate it into all aspects of their life. You can use the multi-factor authentication on your phone in order to easily access the password manager. So when you're using it on your mobile device, I mean, everyone's pretty much mobile these days. They're using desktops less and less in their personal life. So if they get used to using this in their personal life, then they can bring those habits at home. So promoting awareness of it in their personal life will help gain traction at work. That being said, Joe already brought out all the flaws with using browser-based ones or using OS-based ones. So yeah, a third party is definitely going to be more upfront about vulnerabilities, have it checked by pen testers to secure anything or find any holes that are there. And then the other option that works well if you can integrate it into your organization is hardware tokens. While this might initially have started with system administrators or executives, I think they've gotten to the point where they're fairly inexpensive, around $20, and they can be easily integrated into your life. And these hardware token manufacturers work with all the major platforms to try to make it as easy as possible to onboard their platforms to these hardware tokens.
That's a great point, Chris. And one other thing, a tip for those listening today, if you're evaluating a third-party password manager in your organization, one of the things that I would encourage that you ask is, from an administration perspective, does the third-party password manager have visibility to the maturity of the passwords of the users? So there are some products out there, I'm not going to mention them in this call, but there are a number of products out there that can tell you how many passwords a user has stored. Are they weak passwords? Are they duplicated passwords? And a quick story, I had a client who implemented one of these password managers. There was one admin that was so excited. He had 165 passwords all loaded into his password manager in the first week. And then I looked at it and I said, well, that's great. 80% of them are the exact same user ID and password. And we know, the risks of having an email address and the same password throughout many different systems. So having that visibility, they don't all have those capabilities. Having that visibility and then knowing when you have a training opportunity to engage that user again and educate them how to more effectively use a password manager is really important as well.
Yeah. Even the consumer ones are integrating that as features within their password manager, where they will tell you, hey, this is a reused password, or even integrating password dumps into their password manager, saying, hey, this is a password that has been found in a dump, or even notifying you that your username combination has been found in a dump and recommending that you change the password. On the corporate side, many of them that are designed for corporate environments even allow IT administrators to set minimum policies for how they generate passwords, as well as password reuse in particular systems. So definitely look into what your requirements are or what your use case is versus which one you're looking at.
Yeah, good points. Sadia asks a question, and we'll see how we want to answer this. It does come up. A third-party provider, right? Like a password manager of sorts is still a third-party provider. So what's the due diligence that either you as an individual or you as an organization should be doing and looking at them, because now they're storing all of your information to get into all of your most critical things. What's reasonable to start looking at their security? And she asks, is anything truly safe? Not unless it's turned off and unplugged and buried under the ground. Is it truly safe? I mean, this has been the age-old thing with security forever. So I don't think we're ever gonna, hit that nail. But it is a very valid question. What should we be looking at the security posture of these providers? Chris, what are you looking for in those providers if you are going to be implementing them?
Well, I look at, as an information security professional, to see how they've addressed things like working with outside security researchers that might find vulnerabilities in them, and how they address that if I'm using a third-party service. I'm also looking for ones that have the option where I hold the main key that unlocks their vault, and they don't have any keys that can unlock my vault.
Right.
That's something very important to look at. And then there are some options, some ones that even offer the option to have an offline only version, but then you go back to having a single point of failure. So that's something that you have to take within your risk profile if you want to have an offline only version of something like that.
Yeah, there's always going to be trade-offs, right? It's risk versus reward. We're never going to get the perfect solution. Joe, do you have any thoughts on what to look for? I mean, at the end of the day, this is really just an application. Is there something around application security that we should be looking at, or do we just really need to assess them as a vendor?
I mean, not every vendor assessment is the same. This is obviously a critical set of capabilities. I echo everything that Chris said. I look, and I'm sure he does as well, at not just do the subscribers of the service own the keys and the service does not, but then what type of encryption are they using? Typically, we're seeing strong encryption such as AES 256-bit encryption for data at rest. We're looking at, are they application testing and trying to get third parties to actually find flaws in their code? Do they have SOC 2 Type 2? Do they have, ISO 27001 certifications? In some cases, you can get FedRAMP certification from these providers.
Yeah.
One
Let's.
thing to add, some of them are even offering the option to have a corporate private vault where they allow the employees to use it for their personal sake, but
Mhm.
separates out any potential secrets that might be corporate. For example, a corporate user ID, a corporate user ID structure, it might flag it as being a corporate secret and kind of warning the user, hey, not to store it in their private vault. And as well as flagging back that a corporate secret might have been saved in someone's private vault in case they want to have an investigation. But I think
Mm.
promoting this type of use case in someone's personal life will only increase it in their corporate life.
Yeah, very true. I have a funny story and anecdote that I regularly use with difficult to convince CEOs, CFOs, C-level suites at companies. And this is how I take my personal security and bring it into the corporate world. And I did this at my last full-time role as a CISO. Very early on, I taught my parents how to use Password Manager and how to adopt MFA. They had no problem once they sat down with me, and I'm the resident IT, person for the family because this is my field. We all lived through this, right? Um, well, so having taught my parents, right? My parents are now, in their early 60s, not terribly old, but old enough. Um, I have had the conversation with CEOs, CFOs who have said, well, I don't need to use this. I don't need to use MFA, or, it's too cumbersome, or, the whole litany of reasons that we've heard. And I've said to them plainly, well, I taught my mom how to use this. I can put her on the phone and she can explain how easy this is for her. She's 62. Usually that gets the point across. But I think this is still a very relevant thing that's happening with the mindset of adopting solutions like this. And I think if I can give anybody advice around this, if you don't have your own story of being able to use your mom, you know, apply it to the real world that your person you're talking to lives in. You're probably doing this already for Facebook. You're probably already doing this for your personal email. You're definitely doing this for your bank. Why would you treat the security of your own company, the one that you and your brand are associated with, that produces your livelihood? Why would you treat this any less? And that kind of thinking gets people to go, oh, I am doing this in my personal life already. It really isn't that difficult. I do understand the value. And so take away from this, there are ways to get that type of thinking out of the way so you can kind of move on to other stuff. I want to skip MFA and I want to come back to it next just because of the order of things. I want to talk about SSO. Single sign-on. What are you seeing as like the prevalent means to adopt single sign-on in organizations? Chris, I want to ask you that question, and then Joe, I want to ask you, where does it make sense and where does it not make sense? So, Chris, what are your thoughts on just, SSO within the organizations and its kind of rightful place?
I think SSO is an easy way to remove friction. And when combined with something like a hardware token, in addition to username and password, it shows that you've provided that additional layer of authentication for your corporate user, and then potentially allowing, say, general use corporate systems via that SSO is a good point. And then if they're going into, say, something more critical, then provide a reauth via the hardware token. So you can kind of segregate your environments and say, okay, general use will use the SSO as is, no additional authentication. But then if you're going into critical systems, will prompt you for a reauth using the hardware token. And that kind of provides a good way to use SSO for critical and non-critical systems while providing that frictionless environment.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I like to look at it. It's like, how can I remove, friction, but still keep security? Joe, are you seeing anything with clients? Maybe it's the size of a client, maybe it's a sector where this is a good idea or not a good idea. I mean, just kind of pros and cons as far as like right fit.
Single sign-on is for all the reasons that Chris mentioned. It's a great set of technologies. It does take effort to set up and to maintain, which is why we're really not seeing it in, I would say, the 300-400 person companies and smaller. But mid to large companies, we definitely see a trend in implementing this. That really takes out many of the needs for a password manager if you can have one password to authenticate against your identity access management system using multi-factor authentication. As Chris mentioned, hardware tokens are going to be the strongest type of capability for MFA. And then once you're in that system, single signing very, very easily into each target application. And it's very, very rare that you find a security technology that not only strengthens an organization's security posture, but also makes it easier for companies to use. Single sign-on and identity access management is certainly one of those that I love to talk about. The other thing to think about is, remember, there's a statistic, it's a little bit dated, but a couple years ago, there was a research article that was written that 40% of breaches start with an insider threat. So if 40% of your breaches are insiders, when those people leave an organization, think about if you had a user ID and password for all of those systems. How long would it take you to lock down 30, 40 cloud-based systems? Now, ask yourself, while somebody's doing that in organization B, if they had one single sign-on system, how easy is it to lock down that user in that one central system, and then they can no longer log into any of their cloud-based assets? Much easier, lower cost of ownership solution.
Absolutely. And I wanted to add on what Joe just mentioned is that a lot of the cloud providers that kind of provide your kitchen sink of services, so to speak, your platform and your other SaaS services, you're actually providing an SSO option for you to consume from them as part of their identity management system. And for example, even me using Google, their regular service, their Gmail service, they'll prompt me for a second sign-on using my YouTube app, which I have on my phone, and going, hey, Chris, was this really you signing on? So I didn't even need the Google Authenticator. You're using their YouTube app as a secondary means of authentication for that. So you could see how it scales really quickly. And these cloud providers are really trying to push this as an option for their customers for the very reason that Joe mentioned is once you start living in a cloud world, you'd be surprised how quickly your application, the number of applications you have grows quickly.
Absolutely, and Google has that, Microsoft has that. Another tip for all of you listening, just make sure before you start integrating those technologies, think about all of your requirements. What are the systems that you want to connect? What are the other capabilities that you want within your identity access management and single sign-on solution? And I will drop a few names here. You know, in addition to Google and Microsoft, other players you might want to consider are companies like Okta and Ping Identity. Some vendors do a better job than others in integrating, you know, various systems and provisioning users, provisioning accounts as well. So gather all of your requirements and make sure that you're talking to, you know, each of those vendors.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, your cloud providers will provide you with the basics to manage your identity. And like Joe mentioned, the other providers there kind of provide some enhancements over what a CSP might do, because a CSP is just trying to do the basics as part of their overall offering, but you might have more requirements that only a third-party provider can help you with.
Right.
And another
oh, good.
feature, if I may, to consider when it comes to single sign-on, most of us, I should say, probably know our users' complaints about VPN, the fact that they don't like logging into VPN. Some of these identity access management providers will actually provide secure reverse proxy capabilities in which you can move away from VPN and you can actually authenticate through these providers securely to all of your internal cloud applications as well. So that's a huge value add and reduces friction in your organization.
I want to touch on two things. One around single sign-on. SideChannel started out as a 2, 3, then 5 and 10. Now it's a 30-person company. We've adopted single sign-on from the very early days, and it's allowed us to do everything from timekeeping to finance to any of the systems that we integrate with. Now, this is obviously, you know, the kind of norm for startups and you know, smaller companies because you're growing from nothing, right? You have the ability to adopt this very early on, but I still see startups that haven't. So, you know, if you're in that position, do adopt single sign-on now because it's going to allow you to scale better, and you're going to be training your employees from a very early day that this is the way it is, and then you now know that the types of solutions that you can use are the ones that integrate with this. So that works great for startups, smaller organizations that are growing. The larger organizations, obviously that doesn't work. You have legacy ways of doing things and systems and connections. So you need to find the solution that's going to be able to allow you to adopt single sign-on if that makes sense for your organization. I get it. It's not one size fits all, and I know that, you know, all of our attendees today don't all come from, you know, startups that are now growing. The other piece I want to come back to is actually on password managers. There's some great questions, and there's a questions feature right here. If you want to post some questions, we've gotten some great ones. I wanted to actually point out, and we'll link it down below on this, but Wiser actually did a survey on top password managers, and these are a couple questions that came in. We didn't want to, you know, specifically state which ones we personally recommend, but this survey was conducted, and I do want to share this. So KeePass was the #1 ranked password manager, followed by Bitwarden, 1Password, LastPass, Keeper, and then Dashlane. For enterprises, it seems like specifically LastPass or Keeper were the predominant kind of favorites in a survey that Wiser had done some time back. For the average person, it seems as though Bitwarden looks like the one to go with. And coincidentally, one gentleman even said for the ultra nerd, KeePass seems to be the solution of choice. So I know a couple people asked about that. We will definitely post the link to that survey as part of this webinar afterwards. So thank you, Gabby, to you and your team. Let's see here. I have a great question, but it's a bit of a scenario, and I think I need to read it while we get into MFA. So give me a minute there, if you will. I don't know who asked this. I can't see the author. Aruna, thank you. I'm going to read this and we'll see if we can weave this in. So let's talk about MFA solutions. There's a lot of different ones, right? You can get everything from, authenticator app on your phone to SMS messages to a hardware token. There are a lot of things a lot of ways to implement MFA. Let's just set the stage that MFA is obviously kind of table stakes now, right? Like, there's no longer the reason of should you adopt this? Like, you need to adopt this, right? Regulations are calling for it. Your customers are asking about this. If anyone is getting, questionnaires from a third-party standpoint, you're being asked, do you implement MFA? Control frameworks like Nist have at least 3 controls that center around MFA. The CIS used to be the top 20, now the top 18 have a number of controls centered around MFA and its implementation. So we're not going to dodge the fact that we should be doing this. But the real question is, like, how do we best implement it? What are we seeing as pros and cons? Joe, what are your thoughts on, hardware tokens, physical hardware tokens being used? Where is their place, and maybe where is not their place?
To step back, I think that we have to look at what platforms you're using and what is supported first. To just kind of set the stage, there's a number of different factors that you can use. And let me highlight a few, kind of from least effective to most effective. Secret keys, the worst. That's basically a second password. And in most cases, it's what's your mother's maiden name, what was your first pet, and anyone who looks on, LinkedIn or Facebook with some savvy can figure out a lot of those answers pretty quickly. As Chris mentioned, SMS is actually no longer recommended by Nist as an MFA option. It's often used because everybody has a cell phone. Most people have cell phones, but SIM swapping is a big attack vector now, where somebody's pretending that, you're Brian Hoagley, you go to the Verizon store or the AT&T store, now you have his phone, you can use his multi-factor. Probably the most cost-effective is going to be the authenticator apps, although it takes a little bit of time to get users to adopt those. And then, if you're a really vigilant organization, if you look at the types of assets and the types of data that you have, and you need the absolute best security, something like a hardware token, like YubiKey, which is a common one, is a pretty cost-effective solution. And as Chris mentions, $20, $30 is the cost of those tokens. But then when you multiply that by a 1,000-person organization, 10,000-person organization, it can add up.
Right.
So at a minimum, I would start with authenticator apps and then evaluate what your risk tolerance is, what are the things that you're protecting, and determine if you have to go stronger from there.
Before we get to Chris, I want to highlight the one piece I always tell people when they're like, well, like, how are we going to do the authenticator app piece? The reasoning is everyone carries one of these today. Everyone carries one of these. You will have pushback as to whether or not there should be some subsidization, right, or payment or something to the employee to use their personal phone. You have to have a real honest conversation. You run that app on there, how much does that actually cost, and how much data does it actually cost? Nothing, very little, zero. So do your best to shut down that argument, because I've heard it time and time again, and say, just look, everyone's carrying one of these already. Let's again, back to frictionless. You guys have spoken about this a number of times. It's a phenomenal theme. It makes it frictionless. I don't have to force you to carry another hardware token. You don't have to carry a separate corporate phone, right? You have one phone, one app on there for what we're doing. Call it a day. Make it easy, make it secure. Chris, what are your thoughts on kind of hardware tokens, versus the apps on phones and kind of their place in companies to implement MFA?
I think first you have to have the conversation, is this an internally facing or externally facing application? So are you working with your customers? If you're working externally facing, there's a couple options that are out there. One of the growing options in lieu of forcing all your customers to download an authenticator app if they haven't already, has been single-use email as a way to use SMS-like technology without sending an SMS. Carries the same risks that if their customers are reusing their username password combinations across multiple different providers, it could be easily gotten to, but that's a risk on the customer and not the provider, if you're using that as a option. The next option would be then to use an authenticator app, and I don't think I've seen any customers outside of those in the crypto space where they would recommend a hardware token or a hardware wallet for their customers to keep their keys. Specifically in the crypto space is where having an external hardware token or hardware wallet is incredibly important due to the size and quantity that some people might keep in cryptocurrency. SIM swapping has been a huge target for threat actors taking over someone's account if you're using an SMS as the way to have secondary authentication to those crypto accounts. Pivoting into the internal environment, as Joe mentioned, yeah, the price of using hardware tokens can be an initial factor, but you can talk with your finance folks to see if that's something, that purchase is something you can depreciate across a couple years and see if you can have a tax advantage there. I'm no legal or tax accountant, so don't take any financial advice from me. Just have to say that there. The other option is going to an authenticator app, and I wouldn't go anything below.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like we have a lot of great options and some options that we should steer clear of. But there definitely seems like there are things that people could be adopting. There's really no reason to not be adopting a better password strategy. And I kind of just lump all of these things that we're talking about into an overarching password strategy. Yeah, sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I thought of something that leans back to the password managers, is that many of them are authenticating or including a way to use the authenticator app feature and functionality within a password manager. So they provide a Google Authenticator like field where you can enter that shared key that creates that one-time use token within a password manager. So if you're hesitant to go invest in a hardware token, you can use a password manager to help supplement that one-time use functionality that the RSA token from way back in the day did.
Oh yeah.
I see you roll your eyes, Joe.
I was hesitant in mentioning that. I didn't mean to roll my eyes. I was hesitant to mention that because I personally use that function as well. Organizations need to be very cognizant that if you want to do that, and if you want to educate your users and support your users in doing that, that's fine. Just make sure that the authentication mechanisms to that password manager are ironclad, that you have some type of two-factor on the password manager, because that really becomes truly the keys to the kingdom with both your password and your MFA token in that system.
Yeah, it sounds like
it's all a risk equation, right?
Right. When you hone in at the very least, right, maybe this isn't something you can roll out to everyone day one, but at the very least, these are the things that you should be rolling out to those with administrative privileges day one, and then build from there, right? Let's go into Rick. Rick asks a question, but I'm not sure if you're talking about password managers or not. So drop in the chat here and please tell me. But he did ask, are there any favorite, 1 to 3 that are OS agnostic or available for Mac? Do either of you have any preferences around password managers that are OS agnostic or better suited for Mac?
From my
LastPass, 1Password, those have been the commercial ones that offer an application for Mac, Android, as well as browser plugins for all the major browsers, as well as all the major operating systems.
Yeah, for
Okay.
me, 1Password, which supports all the operating systems and mobile devices, which was actually built originally for Mac, but Keeper Security as well has a strong offering that goes across all those platforms.
Excellent, good. And we did get it right. Rick told me that was the question he was asking about, was password managers. Let's go to, and we'll end with a short discussion on IAM solutions. I'm familiar with a few. I've implemented only one. These things are beasts. Let's just get that out of the way, right? This is for the big guys. You know, this is enterprise level work we're talking about here. You know, Joe, what are your thoughts about you know, just maybe some best practices about keeping in mind, and like what's the real use case for an enterprise to consider an IAM solution?
First, I want to level set a little bit because it used to be that IAM was one generic term for a number of different functions. And that's now been broken out. I think what we're really talking about today is identity access management, which is around logging into an identity provider securely with a user ID, with some type of second, factor, and then single signing into all of your other environments. There's also something called identity governance management, which used to fall under that same umbrella. And that's really about provisioning users in all of your environments, deprovisioning them, doing periodic access reviews, which are all good controls, but there's not one vendor that does both very, very well. So let me focus on the authentication piece, which is the conversation today. First and foremost, understanding all of your requirements up front is really, really important. Are you connecting just to cloud resources? Are you connecting to internal resources? What's your user population? Is it the internal organization, or is it also your customers? Do you need to be able to share identities? Hopefully not, but there are unique circumstances when you need to do that. Including your help desk in the rollout, making sure that you're educating the administrators how to support the tool, and really, most importantly, educating your user population, creating a campaign, a communications campaign, an awareness campaign about what's coming, why it's needed, and why it's a good thing for the organization and for the individual.
Chris,
To what Joe was mentioning, I'd also think about things like service accounts and non-machine accounts, because once you get into this inside the organization space, you're going to want to manage the identity of those identities as well. And really, the other part that Joe mentioned is that the governance of them, and then getting into things like role-based access control and those other aspects of identity is something that you want to do as you grow. As you've covered the identification of all your assets, now you want to think about what can they access. But that's, as Joe mentioned, a separate provider that can help you with that.
what are your thoughts on you know, the implementation of these services? Usually they're big enough, or maybe they're outside the scope and skill set of your current staff. You know, how valuable is it to reach out, you know, working with a VAR or an implementer and really getting people who have done this? I mean, is this the type of a tool to be implementing and try to figure out on your, you know, your own with your own IT staff, or is it really worth getting that professional services?
I think that, and there's two aspects to this. One is you use external resources. I think that it's a partnership. You bring in that VAR or the actual software provider to provide some consulting services for the initial implementation, and then also ramping up your internal team. The other thing that you should take into account is, how are we going to roll this out? Are we going to roll this out big bang where we put our 20 cloud applications all on the system at once, or do we slowly do it? And there's a double-edged sword I want to quickly call out with that. When you go big bang, the benefit is that it creates adoption very, very quickly. It creates understanding of what the tool is and why it's needed and what the benefits are immediately. The risk there is that if something goes wrong, you've just locked out all 20 resources at one time. You don't have that risk if you do one application at a time, but just be aware that your user adoption and the questioning of why it's valuable is going to be a longer runway, because it's going to take time to roll out each application and for users to see the full benefits and the full vision.
Yeah, Chris, you're not, without going into details or divulging, your internal kind of processes, you're at a very large, like you said, fintech, financial sector organization, top 10 in, is this the type of solution that, you're building it, or you have a large enough team that's running this and managing this internally, or is this even still something you're reaching out for, external expertise and support on?
I think both. I think it depends on your use case, right? You have a build or buy decision based on your requirements and based on how you're looking to scale with it. I think that's the decision that you have to make when you're at scale, is do you build it, do you buy it? And then there's the other aspect of implementation. Most of the time, there'll be a blend of resources, both internal as well as consulting, to ensure that there's a smooth rollout, that everything's planned. If your team hasn't been experienced with extended rollouts, like Joe mentioned, and then also ensuring that you've sufficiently planned and buffered in resources for if you have a hiccup and you need to have a delay. Having those resources buffered into your plan for such a rollout is incredibly important ahead of time when it comes to planning these rollouts and getting user buy-in. If you don't have your executive support from the top, and I mean from the top, you're gonna face significant resistance along the way. And I've seen this in organizations from 200 to 50,000+, is that you need that executive support in bringing on resources like this, because they change user culture, and anything that changes user culture, it is going to require organizational cultural change, and that's part of the overall change management approach that the organization uses.
Yeah. Gentlemen, this has been a phenomenal hour, or going on hour discussion about passwords and management and identity. Who knew? We've gone from consumer level personal use password managers to corporate password manager use, the adoption of single sign-on, MFA, and then obviously enterprise class IAM solutions. I want to thank you both so much for your time and sharing your experiences and your knowledge on these subjects. To everybody who've attended, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available afterwards. Wiser will be putting together a write-up as well. So please, follow Wiser, follow Side Channel for other updates. We'll be continue to do this series every 2 weeks. This is now, I think, our 5th in the series. Look for the previous ones on things like backups, disaster recovery. We just had a great one on incident response. And we're going to continue to do these every 2 weeks for, I think, now the next 10 weeks. I think we have 5 more left. On behalf of Joe Klein and Chris Foulon, I want to thank again everybody for being here. I'm Brian Hoagley. Follow me anywhere and using hashtag CISOLife. Definitely check out Chris's show, Breaking into Cybersecurity. Those links will be down and included in the write-up after this. Everybody enjoy your Wednesday. Be safe. If you're out Boston and in the area in Secure World, I'm down on the floor as soon as I get up from this chair. So take care, be good, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next one. Thank you, everyone.